This is another case. Val and I were talking about this actually, but Open Road and HarperCollins. So if you read this clause here, both sides are relying on this. And the key thing is this is a book that was published, do you remember if that was in the 70s? Or the contract? It was a long time ago.
In the early 70s, I think. I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. The author was in favor of Open Road Media taking the ebook forward. She actually passed away like a year ago without any deposition on it. But the publishers are claiming wherever possible that the contract covers this as an ebook. It's not something separate. And they said that this anticipated ebooks by having this storage and retrieval in here, that kind of language, at least from an intent standpoint, said that the ebook was part of the HarperCollins contract. But Open Road Media, which specializes in taking say books that have reverted back to the author, and they take those books and they put together creative marketing plans around those, and only on ebooks, and they distribute those. Right? They're kind of a author services or publisher for a lot of other digital only works, and some digital first works, but they got the rights from this author to publish, and now they're going into court, I think very soon, if not now, they're being argued. So that's a case where it just comes down to interpretation of what that clause is. The publishers are really, a lot of these contracts are silent as far as this issue is concerned. And if it's silent, then, as you know, their interpretation is they'd have to split the royalties with the author 50-50. So they've taken the position that they're books, only they're really not books. They're licensed. It's software, right? And so it's a little bit of an issue in the industry right now and how that's all accounted for, because the royalties would normally be in that 5 to 15% range, and they're afraid that it would get up into that 50% range, where a lot of them are being renegotiated up in that level. Or you see people like Open Road or Rosetta Books, who did a deal with the estate of Winston Churchill to take most of his books and make those into ebooks, and that's a 50% royalty is what they're paying on that. That would really kill the publishers. So there's been a lot of discussion about should that say something other than buy now, because it kind of leads us to believe it's a buy. And you remember about 3 years ago when Amazon, which is just really like a book club, right? They ingest this digital file and they just kind of make out copies that they sell to people, is they got, of all books, 1984. And they got it from a source that was not authorized to give them that right to sell it. And when they found that out, they went and took it off the Kindles. Mm-hmm. And everybody got upset about that, of course. Only the people that got upset didn't realize that really they didn't own the book anyway. They were just licensing the book. So they had not only the right to do it, but actually an obligation to do that as well. So this area, I think, is a very confusing area right now, and you're starting to see some, Redigi and Amazon applied for a patent in this area about reselling used digital works, and Apple's got something that they've applied for too. And the way they're trying to do it is to say, what stops it right now is that if I give you the digital file, I have to be able to take it away from you again. And so you might begin to see something like that. It does work that way with library books, is I can borrow a book, and then if I'm done reading it after 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever that period is, then that book won't work anymore, or you just don't turn the Kindle on like me, and then it will work. But at least you don't turn on the communications feature. But you would, but this whole licensing or reselling of a digital product, of a license, is something that people are very interested in making that happen. And so there's another company called, I think it's called Redigi, that's in that area as well. This kind of speaks to your point as well, as territories is kind of an old thing. It seems like now is that people don't understand. A lot of people, a lot of consumers, the public doesn't understand why they can't buy a ebook in a particular country, and they don't understand this whole territorial thing and licensing and why it works in one and why not in another one as well. So I think that's something that's going to be looked at or be an issue going forward. And I put this reference here. This is social reading. What's happened is, and especially with Facebook, so you see people like Facebook, you can't have an account there unless it's your real name, right? Technically. And LinkedIn doesn't really work under an assumed name either. And all of us are getting a little more comfortable by sharing things. And so now when you share what you're doing all the time, or you have this social reading sharing, that if I watch something or read something, I may have already agreed that will show up in my feed to go out for all my friends to see, right? So this is kind of a murky area in regards to privacy. And this is actually a really good, thoughtful piece that this attorney wrote. It's at the Wake Forest Law Review. I have the full URL if anyone wants it. But she even talks about, references one of the justices saying that, if we're all sharing things and we're all kind of okay with that at some point in time, that as a society and even as a kind of a legal foundation, it's going to be very difficult to make an argument that your privacy should be protected, because we've all been giving that up over the last X number of years. And Facebook's just been in the news like crazy for the last 2 years on that very topic. So I think this is going to be another interesting challenge to us. And my last slide is on agency pricing. If you're familiar with agency pricing, it was a really big deal about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. So when the iPad came out, the story is that Steve Jobs, maybe personally, went around to see all these publishers and said, well, let's do a list price. Well, if you're going to sell in the store, I only will sell it if it's at list price. So they have this thing called an agency price, as opposed to just selling it like any other retailer, and the retailer decides how they want to price it. And of course that took Amazon's $10 and below price point and ruined it and gave all the control back to the publishers. So the Justice Department got involved, and we have the settlement now, and I think everybody is settled, if I'm not mistaken. If anybody knows, I think Apple is settling in Europe. I don't know if they're settling here. I think they are. Does anybody know? No? But you had 5 publishers in Apple who did this collusion thing and agreed to set their prices at standard retail prices. And that's what the Justice Department came in and said that was really harmful to consumers to do that. A lot of the states did it as well. And there was a bunch of, concern about the culture of America and the world, about how this is going to, if we don't let the publishers make money, in other words, and we kind of went through this whole thing with newspapers as well, is that if you kind of remove the margins for the publishers, they're not going to have enough money to pay authors, and it's going to be a problem. Everybody blamed it on Amazon. It gives them more power again, and Apple, so it got to be a big issue. But that is actually closing off now, and you're starting to see the prices begin to level out, and below that, actually now most book prices are coming down below $10 on the ebook side of things. So do I have questions? I didn't get into any, like, how do you make them? I can talk about any of that. Whatever else you guys are interested in covering.
KJ, sorry I was late, but I had another meeting that went over time. I wanted to see if you're willing to talk about the old world, because you're talking about the digital world, but if you're just willing to go back for a second to
talk about
the print world.
The print? Okay,
Yeah.
I talk a little bit about it.
Okay. So how do you assess the condition or the status of the major publishers now? Your Doubledays, your Simon & Schusters, and all the rest.
Well,
As contrasted with the e-world. I know some of them are in both worlds.
well, what's happened in that world over the last 12 months is you've seen some M&A activity with them, and you see somebody like a Penguin and Random House actually merging. I think you see there's some fundamental things going on. And so you see that merger, which I think is a direct result of just trying to get more heft against Amazon for it. You see, I don't remember who it was, bought Author Solutions, which is a big service provider to authors. So the independent authors are able, obviously, in the early slide, you don't really have a way now, the authors don't need a lot of that infrastructure in the middle. Because they can, if they have to, they've always been responsible for doing their marketing. So with social media, it's easier than ever. So they do their social media, they get their books printed, and they do the ebooks. They sell it themselves. They're fine, right? But the big guys, I think, are the ones that are most threatened, and where you have the opportunities, and you see some really smart ones, is with people like Nolo Press, people like O'Reilly, which is in the tech area, Chelsea Green in sustainable living. And so these publishers get into a niche, and they have a very strong editorial vision for that particular category, and I think they'll be successful.
Sure. Well, I don't want to monopolize the time, but the other thing that seems to be happening is that they're now, much like the music industry, which with the 360 deal began demanding more and more from the music artists, we're starting to see that in the book world, where they're saying, we want movie rights, we want merchandising rights, and that wasn't the old deal, didn't include all of those things.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think there's a huge number of similarities with music, absolutely, and because they're all just digital files with it. But you look at those bands and what they have to do to survive. It's performance, it's licensed products. It's just not selling vinyl anymore. And so the books, it may be a little bit harder with the authors. They're just not used to going out there and being, consultants or speakers or, who's going to wear a T-shirt.
hustlers.
Harry Potter worked well. They're going to tear down old Universal Amphitheater, I read this morning, and put up Harry Potter World in LA. So she's doing great. But yeah, I think it is going that way in terms of being responsible for your own brand, and the big buzzword is platform, like it is with anything.
I have a question because I know a couple authors who self-published. Being of another generation, they're a little hesitant to e-publish because they hear about piracy. And they say, well, if one person downloaded and paid for my book, they could share it with all their friends. What is your response to people about the pros or even cons of e-publishing?
Of like specifically in the DRM issue, or
versus physical
yeah.
books.
I think there's two sides to that, and with the publishers like it, readers don't like it. We talked about Calibre before. If you buy a book, the last thing you want to do is have to buy another copy of the book, right, in order to read it on something else if you change your platform, right? It's like Men in Black, remember, with the White Album, and the guy says, oh shit, I have to buy the White Album again. And so you have the cassette and the 8-track and the vinyl and all this stuff. So you get people don't like that. You do see there's another issue on a bigger level with Amazon, where people are realizing that we're giving them a lot of power by requiring that DRM is placed on books, because that means that if I buy the books there, I got to keep using their software, their infrastructure, their ecosystem. So there's some pushback on that. And then on the other hand, you see some real successes. So have you heard of the book, Go the F blank blank case to sleep?
Can you say the whole word?
Hmm?
Can you say the whole words?
Yeah. We're all adults here, yeah. So go the fuck to sleep. Now you know the book. No, these guys were great. They're so funny. I saw them last year at the LA Times Book Festival. Is this guy, a father had this hyperactive, like, I don't know, she's 3 or 4 years old and wouldn't go to sleep. And so after he'd finally get her down, he'd go in and he'd pen a few lines, and it'd be a nice little calm poem, and at the end of it would just be this really like very vulgar thing, right? And this is an adult book. And so he would do this, and he showed it to a friend. He had a neighbor friend that's an illustrator, and they did this thing, and showed it to a publisher, and the publisher, very niche publisher, he really loved it a lot. And he said, you know, this is great, I'll do this. This will be a fun project. I like you guys. They're actually all live very close together. So they're going to do a print run of like 10,000. That was it. They thought we'd do 10,000. So they send the PDF out. They're getting reviews and things. So one guy gets the PDF and he likes it. And he shares it with somebody because it's so funny. And the next thing you know, it sold over 1 million copies worldwide as of a year ago, and they have a movie deal. And that's from a 10,000 printing book. So I think that when I talk to people about DRM, I especially a new author, the worst thing that you can do is to kind of hoard your information. You know, you need to get your book out there. And it would be like the greatest thing in the world if it got picked up by somebody and started sharing this is just a wonderful book. And then you'd write another one, right? So I think that they just have to get over that. And we're living in what I call now a generous world. We just have to get our information out there and see what happens and appeal to people on a different level. And there's going to be there's social DRM, if you're familiar with that, where you kind of guilt people into on the information at the bottom and saying, you know, this has been licensed to so-and-so, or give a donation. It's been very successful in these things. So I think get over it. Get over it.
You had mentioned a little bit earlier about...
I can't hear very well, sorry.
Yeah, you had mentioned a little bit earlier about how to.
Yeah. How to do it? Well, let me give you... let me give it in a few, just a few bullet points on how to create an ebook. First of all, you know, pick your subject like the long-form narrative. If you're doing things like picture books, it just doesn't work as well. But it's going to be more complex, right? But if you have an idea for something that's a narrative, it's actually pretty easy to take that content and then upload it to one of the stores, and it'll do an okay job converting it. There's a number of other online stores, online services that will convert a Word document into what's called a MOBI file or an EPUB file, which then is uploaded into one of the stores, okay? And what you want to do when you create anything in Word is or any program really, this stuff is, you want to have style sheets. So just like a book has got a standard way that the chapter looks, the table of contents. You know, you read a book, we kind of take this for granted, right? And it's actually only been around for maybe 140 or 50 years, how a book looks and how it's organized, how all that stuff in the front matter and the back matter and the stuff in the middle. But it's all about consistency. So if you produce a consistent looking manuscript and then you go and convert it you can go to Smashwords, is great, and it's free, and you can upload. They have a lot of helpful information that's there, and they'll take a Word document, they'll convert it, and they'll put it into stores for you, all for free. Or you just pay a commission when you sell something. That's one way to do it. Otherwise, you call me. But
Buy his book.
yeah, actually, I brought my books to sell too. I always never sell my books, but anyway, I have a book. I wrote that book. I'm selling it here. You can buy the ebook, or you can buy it from me. But that's what I did in the book, is I went through the whole process and why I wrote it, because of that kind of a question. Thanks, Rita. I forgot about that. I don't know.
You gotta buy the book.
I'll call you. I'm actually talking to publishers and writers in San Diego in September or October. If you give me your name, I'll send you a note. It's got like 200 or 300 members. It meets kind of mid-county.
Well, another question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you know if it's the same with comic books as opposed to your traditional novels. Have you seen it? Has the print been dropping because the traditional comic book shop is usually very small as opposed to they don't really have any chain stores? Do you?
There's a couple of things with comic books. One is that, like any book that is what you call a fixed layout, right? Almost like a PDF in a way. So everything has to be in a certain place. The text is very important in how it's designed. The colors, a lot of graphics. It is highly designed. So that's going to work as what you would call in the ebook world as a fixed page layout. Okay, but there's actually a couple of platforms that specialize in comic books. So you would publish with them, and then they have an app that the comic book would be displayed within. And they're kind of set up for serialized kinds of applications like this, you know, subscriptions and things.
How do you see the issue of privacy developing? I know, like you mentioned the idea that you're licensing a book rather than buying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting when you mentioned that like Amazon can track how many pages you're reading and things like that. Is there a contract that people agree to when they're downloading these books?
Yeah, there's some of the stuff is there. It's all an aggregated fashion, right? But Amazon specifically has a couple of really actually very nice features. One is a highlighter feature, and as you read a book, you can highlight like you do anything, right, with your yellow highlighter. That feature you can turn on or off, and in terms of sharing that information. And so if you turn it on, you can actually see what other people have highlighted in the book too. And you can go to the Amazon, if you go to an Amazon book page where they have an ebook, and you look down, and especially a popular ebook, something, it could be any book actually, fiction or nonfiction, you'll see popular highlights. And those are highlights that people have agreed to share publicly, but it is a conscious decision that you make, how you do that. You have to affirm. Is that what you mean on that part of it? Yeah.
Well, I guess it's sort of a separate part of the digital world. I know I've seen a lot of people with, or at least somebody I follow on Twitter has been doing sort of the Kickstarter campaign for her novel. So she had the small publisher, and she said, okay, well, I need $3,000 to give to the small publisher, and then they'll do, I guess, some marketing for her, and it'll be out there. And so the whole Kickstarter campaign, do you see that a lot with authors as well?
I think that's a pretty new area, and you know, like a lot of this stuff, it gets it gets a lot of play. I can't remember the artist that did a music album raised over $1 million there, right? So it's like gambling, right? You only hear about the real big winners, but I think it's viable, and like anything, you could probably do it. I mean, that's not a bad number. I mean, she could probably do pretty well with $3,000, you know. So you don't need a lot for a self-published author if you're really being, you know, if you're really planning things well. But I don't think it's that mainstream. Yeah, and because part of it is that it's not that expensive. You know, a lot of authors do it themselves. If you have more time than money, then, like I said, you could publish your print book for free. You could publish, you know, I don't know how the cover's going to look, but you could do it, you know, especially business stuff, a little bit easier. The expectations are a little bit lower, you know, in that regard. You get caught up in reviews, though. If you produce junk, you're going to get sent back. Either Amazon's going to send it back, or you're going to get beat up in the reviews.
So as far as recommending platforms on which to bring our publications out, do you recommend that we get your book? I mean, there's so many companies we can choose from, we authors.
Yeah, there's a couple parts to the equation, right? There's actually turning it into a book, and then there's the distribution piece of it, right? And so, yeah, that covers both of them. You don't need me. I mean, that covers everything you need to know in terms of ISBN numbers and and catalog and print information all the way to distribution and, tools, free tools, all that kind of stuff. But the production part of it, it really depends on what somebody's producing. That's where some expertise may come in handy sometimes, is to take a look at the content that someone has. If you're an author and you have, or anyone, business that's publishing as well, and you know who you have to reach, and you're good with the technology, you can probably produce it and go straight to Amazon and distribute it through their KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing platform. So it's kdp.amazon.com, and and that's free. You put your book up online. You don't need an ISBN number, and it gets into the Amazon store for sale. Put your price on it, what territories you want to sell in.
Do you recommend that?
I'd recommend all new authors just use Amazon to start off with. Yeah, just because it's so easy. And then once the hardest part on any of this stuff, I mean, we all use technology all day long. And I think that whether it's learning a social network or learning a distribution platform, or even a ebook conversion tool, is just do one thing at a time, and you can get it up on Amazon. It's good for a new author. I tell you, it's going to be 75-80% of the market anyway, and save yourself some time and heartache, because you can spend all this time fooling around with another place to sell when really you should be marketing, and that's really the best part about it.
And a quick last
Sure.
question on search engine. Can you say that again about Google versus?
Well, I don't understand. You have 3 titles on your book.
3 what?
Title.
Oh, these?
Yeah, on
Yeah.
your book you got 3 titles. You got successful book publishing on the one. You got the complete how-to guide for creating and launching. You got 3 titles.
Well, it's one title with a really long subtitle because I was going for the SEO value, right?
Okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, exactly right. No, I sat down and played with these words, and I go to the Google keyword tool, thing, and because that's in the book too. Is that I have tools that authors should be using, and you want to use, like, you're going to buy ads on Google, right? They have a tool that helps you identify popular words that people are typing in to search. So I did all that. You can't do that on Amazon, but how-to is an incredibly popular word, guide, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff.
My question is, Amazon don't let you do that.
Did I do?
Amazon. You cannot do that in Amazon. You have to do only one title.
You have a title and a subtitle.
Okay.
Yeah, just title and subtitle. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, title and subtitle. Yeah, those 2 things. And there is a little bit of a limit there. They don't. You have a really long title, and they can tell that you're gaming the system. They won't let you do it.
Okay.
They'll stop that. Because some people do that. They have these really ridiculous long titles.
Could you maybe just kind of talk about sort of the basic types of marketing that you would, sort of suggest for some publisher?
The ones,
new
the
author?
ones that I talk about in the book, just get a release out there, do some collateral. Reviews, I think, are the number one thing. Absolutely number one thing. You got to get reviews, and I would look at the KDP Select program, which is, if you're not familiar with that, what you do is you agree to give Amazon a 90-day exclusive to put your book in their catalog for 90 days for free. And in that 90-day period, you are given 5 days, 5 24-hour periods that you can offer your book for free, which sounds crazy, but when you offer it for free, and most people will do 2 days at a time or 3 days at a time, and you tell everybody about this free book and you give it away, and it changes the algorithm because your book gets really popular. And when it comes off the free, it still stays up here. So when people are doing searches, you have this sort of, you've seen this, people who bought this book also bought this book, or it shows up in different searches. So the visibility of the book increases, and you actually get some sales. It hasn't been quite as effective in the last 6 or 8 months, but early on, people would make a lot of money doing that. So if you're a fiction author, you might have 10 or 20,000 free downloads, but then you might get another, hundreds of downloads or a couple thousand downloads. So I did that with this book at the end, right around New Year's, I think it was the weekend before, and I had 1,178 copies worldwide. I didn't see a very big jump. I had maybe a couple $100, you know, that I made on that. So it kind of depends on the book, but that's a really popular way to help market your book. I have a blog post too that I did on Sellbox. That this is just a really good thing to mention. This lady, I interviewed her because what impressed me is she wrote her book and she finished it and put it on the shelf in December of 2011. And then she began marketing herself. And she built up she's a home exchange expert. And so her book was a memoir. So she took her book and she started entering chapters into different book contests. And she just won there's a really big author conference in San Diego in the spring, this last month. And she got an award for her book there, still not published. She took her Twitter following from, I don't know, 10 people or something up to like 3,000 or 4,000. She's blogging on the Huffington Post, and she's done some other things. I can't remember what it was, but her platform and her Facebook page is really high. So she spent the last 12 months really building up her reputation and her name in this area, and kind of fighting the urge of getting that off the shelf and trying to see if she can sell it immediately. And because of that, I think she'll either get a publisher or when she's ready, she'll have a lot greater chance. And we talk about music. So the ASCAP convention was in LA last week, and I heard this through a friend of mine who said that the people there, panels and whatnot, were saying that the labels are not looking at you unless you have a mailing list of at least 2,500 people and 1,000 social media contacts, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or something like that. So 2,500 mailing list and 1,000 on the social media side. So I think that's the same thing I think is going to happen on publishing. You're going to see some small niche publishers who might take in an author after they figured out it's a little bit harder than what they realized and say, okay, so how many people can you sell this to? Because it really is an investment that the publisher, a good publisher, has to make in it.
So you were mentioning, getting back to if you're a new writer and you want to do this thing with Amazon, this deal, does Amazon have certain like maybe option or benchmark requirements? Like they say, okay, we're gonna let you put your book on here for free. Let's say you want to do a series. I mean, then if you sell this many, then you have an obligation to put the next book on, and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they don't. On their KDP, the self-publishing platform, Amazon does not have when you go into it, they don't have any requirements. They do on certain other programs. I think their singles program, you have to apply to be part of that. But unlike Apple, so Apple is like, Apple's Apple, it's over here. So you can do Apple, if I'm going to self-publish on Apple, first I go to a page and I apply. And that's going to take several days to a week. And then I get approved. Then I've got to go to another site and fill out all this information. And then I download this 250 megabyte file to my Mac, because I can only use a Mac to upload a file into Apple. And then they approve your book. They'll actually look at it and do quality control on the book and decide whether or not they'll accept it. Amazon will do it after the fact. And they'll have, the readers will write in and say, hey, this book is a problem here. But they don't, there's no kind of like pre-publishing requirements, other than the terms and conditions, of course.